All right, so today we're talking about communication barriers and how to avoid them. Let's get right into it. Most of us have never been taught how to communicate. We've discovered that, we understand that, and we need to close that gap up so that we can have some good relationships. Now, barriers, right? When it comes to, I believe, spouse relationships, friendships, parental relationships, there's always going to be barriers because I believe relationships is like the greatest commodity. I believe relationships are so important that there's going to be a barrier. Let me give you some examples of what barriers could be. Time, right? If you always communicate in a rush. Number two, styles of communication. By now we know that men don't communicate the same exact way as women, vice versa. Neither is wrong, we just don't communicate the same way. The style also being, it could be, we're in a generation now or era where texting is very, very, it's easier than being on the phone. That could be a barrier, or the barrier could be, which usually it is, our past. How we hear things is usually based on our old experiences and where we're at in our healing journey. Now, I'll just confess that for me, my wife had to tell me a lot of times that I'm on your team. I'm not saying this as if I'm not on your team. That took me a long time to get over with the help of the Lord Jesus, therapy, journaling, all of that. Because I was so used to people leaving me that I kept thinking every time she brought an issue up that it was her saying she wanted to leave. So it could be your own trauma. It could be your own ear of how you've dealt with things in the past and the other person. So there's tons of barriers, but those are the main ones I believe. Now, how do we get past those barriers? Because you're not going to just say, I want to have great communication, and it just happens. Number one, you have to identify, I would say, your own triggers when it comes to communication. For me, because my dad has left me so many times, when I would see a letter, I would get triggered because he would leave by leaving a letter at the house. When we were gone, we would come back and see a letter. We would see the furniture gone because he would leave. So for a while, me seeing letters was a horrible way of communication. I had to discover more triggers to realize when someone would tell me, especially someone close to me like my wife, when she would be like, hey, you didn't do this right. It wasn't her saying I was a bad person. It wasn't her saying that I don't do anything right. It was literally just saying this wasn't right. It wasn't saying that she was throwing me away, I was alienated. That's just what it was. Once I started finding out that those were my triggers, when we got into heated discussions or when we got into discussions that made us have to dissect stuff, I wasn't as triggered. I didn't become perfect at it, but I became less triggered. So I would say number one, finding out what are the triggers that you have. Like, what triggers you when it comes to communicating. One of the triggers that we see now could be, hey, if this person doesn't text me all day, every day, they don't love me. That could be a trigger for some people. If this person doesn't call me every day, that can be a trigger. If this person doesn't say good morning every day, that could be a trigger. So I would say number one, find out your triggers. Number two, this is a hard one, but this is one that could change the game for your relationships, your business relationships, and all of that. Ask people, what do they hear when you communicate with them? Right? What do they hear when you communicate with them? Now, we in ourselves think that we communicate perfectly, right? We think that we're amazing communicators. We think that we got it on lock. But sometimes if you ask somebody else and you give them the opportunity to be like, hey, you can tell me and you don't have to dress it up. It can be just grace. You'll find out that sometimes you communicate with anger, you communicate with resentment in your heart, or you could be belittling people. When I first became a coach, I was so direct and I was coaching women. Those two didn't go well. So I would be meaning well, but I would be communicating so direct. Do this, do this, do this. And it was until one day a lady who's a great friend of my family let me know, you don't have to say it like that. If you say it this way, you might get a better response. And of course, at first I was like, man, she don't know what she's talking about. She ain't no coach. Blah, 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 blah. Until I realized, I took the advice, I implemented it, and she was right. So I would say for the second one, ask somebody, how do I communicate? Like, what do you hear when I'm communicating? And don't take offense to it, because growth is hard. Growth is ugly. It's messy. But once you start fixing those things and you're growing, you'll realize, like, sky's the limit, man. Like, you'll realize also that you could offer so much more. So the first one being, find out your triggers. The second one would be, find out how people receive your communication. And the third one, honestly, to get past those communication barriers, practice active listening daily. If you do this daily, you are going to get better probably within 30 days or even less. Now, you might say, like, who am I practicing with? Anybody who's talking to you. Actively listen to them. Turn towards them. Give them your full attention. Put your phone down. Look at them. Like, listen. Ask follow-up questions. Ask open-ended questions. The world is short. It's shy of active listeners. And I believe if you cannot actively listen to somebody, there's going to be more barriers and hurdles than you think. We designed a course. It's called the Love Rebooted 30-Day Bootcamp. And part of the course is helping you realize how much you could be listening that would get you further than any speech, any letter, any expensive dinner could that you would even imagine. If you want that, I'll put it in the link. Love Rebooted Bootcamp will change your life, change your relationships. So with those three, you got number one, find out your triggers. You can do this by yourself or with a therapist, a friend. Number two, find out how you communicate. You want to find out if I'm always communicating yelling, why am I yelling? Why am I always communicating so direct? Why don't I have the patience? My daughter, my 5-year-old, has helped me become a better communicator, because she will tell you, like, you're yelling at me, and I'm not yelling, I'm just talking loud, or you're not listening. She's also helped me realize that I need to be better at actively listening, because I believe that women talk in layers, and when she's telling me something, that could be not what's wrong. And then 10 minutes later, she comes out and says what's wrong. And then number three, practice actively listening daily. When people talk, listen. When you're watching stuff, listen. Listen for the things that they're not saying up front. Listen to the cues. Listen and watch their body language, and you'll see some miracles happening for your relationships. The Love Rebooted Bootcamp. It's a self-paced course. It's 30 days. You have a prompt and an assignment every day. And this is only meant for people who want to serve their partners better, who are single, who want to understand, what am I going to get into when it comes to marriage, when it comes to dating to be married. Not a situationship, but people who really want to be better at relationships. Love Rebooted Bootcamp, I guarantee you, will change your relationships. It will change your life. I cannot say it enough. Not because I just made it. I made it with some people also, because I wanted to have other perspectives and opinions to give people so that they can grow their relationships. I'll leave that in the captions. I'll leave it in the captions. Be great, guys. I'm out of here.